Okay, let's get going. Welcome, everyone. As usual, welcome to the Harvard Law School students in the room, the edX students who are watching this via webcast, the members of the public who are watching the public webcast, and those who are watching this at some time in the future. It's now late February 2013. This is the third of 6 special events associated with the copyright course. The topic for tonight is extralegal norms. So here's the relationship between that subject and copyright law. As pretty much all of you know by now, copyright law reaches lots of fields of creativity, but not all. There are some zones of innovation, artistic and otherwise, that copyright law does not effectively govern. So one of the examples of such a field we've already discussed in the previous special event. That, as you know, is fashion. Innovations in fashion enjoy, as a practical matter, no intellectual property protection. Other areas of creativity that currently do not enjoy copyright protection include cuisine. So innovations by chefs can be, as a matter of law, copied freely. Magic. Magicians have no legal protection when their tricks are copied or, even more damagingly, revealed. And comedy. Now, the situation in comedy is, as you will soon see, complicated. There are certain situations, specifically involving verbatim reproduction of creative text, already where copyright law is implicated. But for the most part, innovations in comedy, the essence of jokes, do not enjoy legal protection. Now, in some of these fields that are currently lie outside the zone of copyright law, copying, what's sometimes referred to as piracy, is rampant, which you shouldn't find surprising because the law doesn't impede it. There's obvious economic incentives for people to free ride on others' innovations. But in other zones, copying is at least to some degree curtailed by extralegal norms, rules developed tacitly by the members of a community and enforced by extralegal sanctions, ranging from social snubs to violence, I guess in theory, murder. But that occurs actually with respect to lobstering, but so far as I know, not with respect to comedy. So we're going to be exploring tonight one of these zones, specifically, not surprisingly, comedy. And we have the benefit of 2 experts in this area. Their expertise derives from very different sources. So the first of them is Jim Mendrinos, who is an accomplished stand-up comedian. He has been a stand-up comedian since the age of 19. And he has also, not only been practicing this art for many years, but also has written a book, an insightful book in this area, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Comedy Writing. I read a little bit of it illicitly over Google, and it's instructive. So please welcome Jim Mendrinos.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So the pressure to be funny is starting right now, I take it. Comedy as having no protections isn't exactly true. Areas of comedy are very protected. Sitcoms are incredibly protected. Movies are incredibly protected. Plays are incredibly protected. What's not protected specifically is stand-up comedy. And it's not protected in the traditional ways. And I guess the biggest reason for that is the way stand-up comedy is performed. There is no governing body. In film, in television, there's the Writers Guild that's protecting their writers. There is no Writers Guild for stand-up comedians. We perform in murky bars late at night, usually in front of you guys when you are totally drunk off your asses. And we have the unbelievable pressure of be funny or go home. So instead of having one governing body that gives us a set of business and legal standards, we have approximately 15,000 different sets of standards and practices. So that oftentimes we're left with absolutely no ability to protect ourselves and protect our intellectual property. It becomes problematic when you consider the fact that most modern comedians aren't doing what your parents' comedians did. Your parents' comedians would go to somebody, buy a joke, it would be tired, it would be trite, 45 people would share the same joke, and it was all about the performance. The modern comics, the guys that you guys look up to, people like Louis C.K. or Louis Black or Chris Rock, those guys are grabbing pieces of their lives and bringing it on stage. So when someone essentially steals a joke of yours, they're also stealing something that's intensely personal and a real big piece of your own history, which is why the single biggest way we govern each other in stand-up comedy is pretty much punch to the side of the head. And it's been that way since I started in stand-up comedy in 1983. It is, for lack of a better way to say it, the artistic equivalent of the Wild West. With nobody there to watch out for us, nobody there to look out for us, we're all looking out for each other. And besides, physical violence, did he really just say physical violence? Besides punching each other, which is way more common than people believe, there's also social pressure. There's also the pressure of, I won't work if this person goes on stage. I don't know how much you know about the reputation of a lot of comedians, but people such as Robin Williams, who is very famous but also has a very large reputation for borrowing people's work. We'll call it borrowing to be nice. Many comics won't go on stage if he's in the room. If you're next and Robin walks in, there's a whole lot of comics that just go, I don't need to go on stage that much. I don't need this set. I need the jokes more than I need the set. The biggest problem that we incur is if somebody more famous than you steals your material, the average audience member isn't going to give you, the unfamous comic, the benefit of the doubt. It's been the case where I've had my material stolen by somebody more famous than me, Robin Williams, and he's done it on television, and the joke is burned for me from that point moving forward. And we've got no recourse. We've got nothing we can do. Now, luckily, with people that have a reputation for taking material, I think the general public is becoming more and more keenly aware of the art form of comedy, so there's a little bit of slide, but there's not much. The other problem that we run into is the common material, things that anybody can talk about. In my act, if you Google me on YouTube, you're going to find huge chunks of me talking about the weather. If you Google Louis Black, you're going to find huge chunks of him talking about the weather. There's nothing more common than the weather. And 50, 75, 100 comics do it, and we're going to cross material on occasion. And you have to, as an artist, know when somebody really stole something from you or somebody just wrote the same crappy joke that you did. Which sometimes with the egos that stand-up comics have is not tremendously easy. It's also, believe it or not, getting better now than it's ever been, just simply because of what you're doing. You're online right now. You guys can Google anything. When I started in the 80s, if I did a small town in the middle of Iowa or in the middle of Alabama that I wasn't going to be in for another 3 years, local comics would feel very comfortable just grabbing my material and doing it and learning their craft off of my intellectual property. But now everyone's got a YouTube page, everyone's got a Facebook page, everyone's got social media, so you can see that person you worked with 3 months ago doing your bit, and you're able to communicate with them and post really nasty, catty comments on their walls and pressure them to getting out. So in a lot of ways, technology is making it more difficult to steal, but it's also making it easier to steal. Because now there are people that have never met me that can actually do bits of mine. And that has happened. I actually have family over in Greece, and they sent me a clip of a comedian speaking in Greek, and I don't understand a word they're saying. And I said to my sister, "Why'd you send this to me?" And she emailed back, "Here's you doing the same bit." So there's a lot of problems that you can run into. And there's a lot of issues that come up with it right now. And unfortunately, he with the best reputation wins. He with the most credentials wins. And even more sadly, he who draws the most audience members will always win. If I accuse somebody of stealing a joke from me and I go to a club owner and go, "Please don't hire this person, they're stealing my jokes," he really doesn't care about my intellectual property. He cares about how many tequilas he sold over the course of a night. So without the ability to have some economic recourse or some kind of prosecutorial resource, we're out there on our own. And it gets creative on how we help each other. I don't know if any of you guys have seen what Joe Rogan did to Carlos Mencia, but public shaming is a new effective tool. We're getting more and more things in our arsenal. I know when I started, the single most effective thing I could do when I knew somebody was stealing my material was go to a club that I knew they were performing in, not let them see me, and literally yell the punchline out 2 seconds before they could. And again, if you ruin their set, you kind of ruin everything. It happens more frequently than you think. There's a lot of I don't want to say lazy people as artists, but there's a lot of people that really, truly, deeply want to be artists, but don't have the ability. They don't have the ability to stand up and make a room full of people laugh with their own ideas and their own points of view. So they're culling them. One from Louis C.K., one from Ricky Gervais, one from Louis Black, and on and on and on, until they've cobbled together something that, in essence, turns them into a really good comedy cover band. But unfortunately, the lion's share of the general public doesn't know who the cover bands are and who the originals are. And it does make it difficult because nobody wants to see something that they've seen somebody famous do. So when those people get success, it trickles down and hurts everybody in the industry. I think the main reason why people do it is because it's also a really shrinking industry. Stand-up comedy in the 1980s was tremendously popular. Every small town had a full-time comedy club. There were thousands of them across the country, and now we've dwindled down to about 500 legitimate comedy clubs. There's a whole bunch of places that'll have a night or two of comedy, but unless you live in a major city, a Boston, a San Francisco, a New York, a Chicago, you're not going to have the ability to go out to a truly good club. So with so few good clubs, the pressure to have a better act, the pressure to be better than you are so you can get to those clubs and not have to play the really crappy clubs. Because the difference in pay is astronomical. If you're working a legitimate comedy club as a newer comic, well, you might MC that week for $400 to $500, which, believe it or not, there are some people living off of. And if you're emceeing the even smaller clubs, you might only be making $200. So for some of these guys, it's the difference between making a meager living or not making a living at all. So I understand the desperation, but it's difficult to get them to stop until the clubs get involved, until there's a set of recourse that we can all apply and go, okay, you did this, this is the problem. It gets a little bit easier to spot the thieves as they go on in their careers. When you start seeing somebody and you go, wow, that bit is so-and-so's bit, and that bit is so-and-so's bit, and that bit is so-and-so's bit, like people have been doing with Carlos Mencia, then it's real easy to go, okay, that guy's a thief. What's harder to spot is somebody who has 20 good minutes, but to get to that half-hour mark, grabs a bit here, a bit there. So they've got a couple of really well-hidden, stolen pieces sandwiched in between stuff that is theirs. And again, it comes down to a personal set of morals. It comes down to, what somebody's willing to do. But it's also an act of desperation in a really under-monetized industry. Again, there's no copyright procedure for a joke. I can't type them out and send them to the Library of Congress and get them copywritten. I mean, there's thousands of people doing it, the same material. And it's not new. I don't know if you guys are studying film at all, but if you study really early film before the copyright protections were fully in place, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin did the same boxing bit. Buster Keaton did it in one movie, Chaplin did it in another movie, and nobody sued anybody else. Who did it first, they've argued that for generations. But again, it's a matter of, until the industry matures enough to have those rules in place, we're kind of hosed. We're definitely hosed. There are some other things that are making it difficult besides the fact that we can't really be every place at every time. It's where we're working. Not the most reputable places in the world. A lot of stand-up comedy tends to be cash under the table. Surprise, there are people breaking the law. Did you guys know that? There's a lot of cash under the table places, so we're not in the most reputable environments. We're also in places that tend to cater, and have a lot of one-time shows. I'm at the point in my career where I'm no longer working those small little bars. I'm working casinos, and I'm working cruise ships, and I'm working corporate gigs, and those gigs tend to be one comic alone doing the job, which means there's nobody there to police me. I could grab anything I want from anyone I want, and with the audience not caring and with the venue not caring, if I didn't have the moral structure I had, it would be very easy just to grab and go. I think before it sounds like the entire industry is filled with vultures and cutthroat people, and there are a lot of comedians who should pretty much drown in their own saliva, but there's also a lot of people who have wonderful egos. And the more ego-driven a comic is, the more you find their art shines. I wouldn't want to do a joke that somebody else wrote just simply because I would feel like the laugh didn't belong to me. But again, that's my moral compass, that's my ego, that's what I'm looking to do. And we've got so many people that we have to adhere to. So many people that we're looking at and we're going, okay, what's your moral compass? I remember a lot of years ago, there was a gentleman from the South who was a renowned joke thief. And when you'd work with him, he'd literally walk up to you with a fistful of cash and go, hey, you see these jokes? I want them. And you as a young comic would go, well, no, those are my jokes. That's my bread and butter. And he would flat out tell you, look, I'm going to do them anyway. You might as well take some cash. And it is unfortunate because it is that basic. They don't care. The thieves don't care. The venues don't care. And you, the audience, don't care. I'm sure you've laughed at a joke that somebody else originated. I'm sure, I know there's some AV stuff they're going to show you, and I'm sure you'll laugh at some of the stuff that they're going to show you, from the thief as well as from the originator. The single biggest problem is it's a performer's medium. You don't care about the joke, you care about Robin Williams. You're not a fan of the joke, you're a fan of Carlos Mencia. Okay, and the ones that are good, you really don't care what material Louis C.K. does as long as you see Louis C.K. You want to see him perform. So given all of that, it becomes incredibly difficult to self-police because the apathy is ingrained at the fan level, which is the most basic level there is for us as performers. I just got to say, you guys are a miserably difficult audience. You realize that, right? You guys are sitting there stone-faced, you're typing. You are not making my job easy whatsoever. Now, I'm supposed to be all serious about joke writing, but you also have to remember another really big factor is the pleasure factor. Just what happened just there, you guys chuckling like that, for me, as a comedian, that's everything. That's what I live for. That wave of laughter that comes from an audience onto a comedian, when you talk to comedians, that's why they're doing it. I've got a job that I would do for free. If suddenly tomorrow nobody in the world would pay for a stand-up comic, believe me, I'd still find some little hole in the wall to tell jokes at, because that wave of laughter is the most important thing. So you do have the same mentality that you have with anybody who's compulsive. And if the thief can't produce that wave of laughter with their own material, it just like any junkie, just like any drug addict or drunk, they're going to have no qualms turning around and doing whatever it takes to get that wave of laughter. You know, that's why there's a lot of incredibly hackneyed material. That's why there's a lot of incredibly repetitious material. And that's why the problem with thievery is not going to stop anytime soon. I would hope, as I'm starting to wrap this up and turning it over to the next speaker, I would hope that, you know, minds like yours, you know, the next generation of lawyers can find a way to make, you know, individual intellectual property a little bit more protected. I would hope that there's a way that, you know, we can find a way to copyright the material rather than just the performance of said material. But until that time comes, it's still going to remain every man or woman for themselves, and it's still going to be that the single best way to protect yourself from getting something stolen is by punching somebody in the side of the head. And full disclosure, oh yeah, I've absolutely hit people on the side of the head and locked people in a bathroom and not let them out until they've realized what they did was wrong, and physically tormented people. It's not something I'm proud of, but when somebody's stealing your livelihood, when somebody's stealing what's special about you, you tend to protect it very, 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 you know, passionately. And I have, and I know a lot of comics who have, and I know a lot of them that would. But also, you know, given the perspective of age, when I started performing I was 19, I'm in my 40s now, the stuff I was doing at 19 to protect my material isn't the same that I do today. Today I would more likely, you know, basically leverage my reputation. Hey, so-and-so's stealing my jokes. If he works here, I'm not. And I've actually done that at a couple of clubs, and because I'm more valuable to them than the other comic, I win. If it were the other way around, I would absolutely lose. All right? I am going to actually turn you guys over, but thank you so much for listening to me, and I will be back for questions at the end. Thanks, guys. Does that work for you, Deborah?
So I'm sure you have questions, and you have devices on which you can store them. So hang on to them, and they will be deployed in about 20 minutes. So before then, we have our second speaker. Dotan Oliar is a professor of copyright and intellectual property in general at the University of Virginia. He has written quite broadly on the subject of this course. His early work consisted of the most detailed and convincing explication of the constitutional provision on which all of copyright law is based. Then he wrote several related articles on the subject of tonight, comedy and extralegal norms. Some of them co-authored with Chris Sprigman, who you have already seen. Now he's working on a completely different subject involving registration systems, the glories of which you will soon learn about. So Dotan, I think, is going to begin with a few clips, and then he will speak to this issue for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a general discussion.
So I just want to say thank you, Terry, for inviting me here. I was a student of Terry's about 10 years ago, and owe much of my intellectual heritage to Terry. So it's great to be back. And let's start with watching one clip. So we'll just watch the Cosby-Mencia clip. And what you'll see there is Bill Cosby telling a bit, and then Carlos Mencia telling a similar one.
You grab the boy when he's like this, see? You say, come here, boy. 2 years old, you say, get down. Dad show you how to do it. Now, you come at me. Run through me. There, see? Get back up. Get back up. See? You didn't do it right. Now, come at me. See? Now, you teach him, see? You say, now, go attack that tree. Bite it. Come on back. Bite it again. You teach him all that. Tackle me. Bam! And then soon he's bigger and he's stronger and he can hit you and you don't want him to hit you anymore. You say, all right, son, turn him loose on high school. And he's running up and down the field, high school, touchdown, 800 touchdowns per game. You say, yes, that's my son. And he goes to a big college playing for a big school, 3 million students and 800,000 people in the stand. National TV, and he catches the ball and he doesn't even bother to get out of the way. He just runs over everybody. For a TD and turn around and the camera's on him and you're looking and he says, hi, Mom. Well, you don't mind that. You know who taught him.
He gives him a football and he shows him how to pass it. He shows him every day how to pass that football, how to 3-step, 5-step, 7-step drop. He shows him how to throw the bomb, how to throw the out, how to throw the hook, how to throw the corner. He shows this little kid everything that he needs to know about how to be a great quarterback. He even moves from one city to the other so that kid could be in a better high school. Then that kid goes to college. And that man is still, every single game that dad is right there. And he's in college getting better. He wins a Heisman Trophy. He ends up in the NFL. 5 years later, he ends up in the Super Bowl. They win the Super Bowl. He gets the MVP of the Super Bowl. And when the cameras come up to him and say, you got anything to say to the camera? I love you, Mom. That bitch never played catch with you.
Okay, so these are the realities that people like Jim have to face. So when Chris Brigman and I started this project, we really saw the internet clip that Jim talked about when in one comedy club, Joe Rogan, the host, saw Carlos Mencia coming in, called him Carlos Mencia, and then Carlos came to the audience and was this big altercation, 20 minutes on the stage of a stand-up comedy. The result was that Joe Rogan got fired. He wasn't supposed to do the dirty laundry and ruin the business. But then it got us started, and then we looked online and we found clips like that, and we just said, look, we teach copyright law in the textbooks we use. There's not even one case about stand-up comics, but this is, prevalent. And we looked on Lexis and Westlaw, and we couldn't even find one reported case, right, about one comedian suing another, right? There are cases about suits over jokes when there's a deep pocket, like if there's a T-shirt manufacturer who took one of Jeff Foxworthy's jokes and put them on a T-shirt, then you see a lawsuit. There's a commercial party or book publishers, but not as between comedians. And so that was the puzzle that led us to do some research and talk to people like Jim. So we had first two puzzles. Like one, why aren't comedians using the law? We know the law, right? Jokes, comedic routines, that can be protected, right? These are literary works, short sometimes, but literary works. They're original, right? Look at this bit, they're fixed. So what's the problem, Why don't people like Cosby just, go to court? So in the particular case of Cosby, so we asked those questions, comedians, And as you can see, people like Jim, we asked like an academic question, and we never got a straight answer. But as one of the comedians asked her this question about Cosby particularly, he said, well, at this point, Cosby has all the jelly that he would like to eat. That's a reference to a series of commercials for Jell-O that he did back in the 80s. So he doesn't, right? He's not going to do that. But why aren't other comedians doing that? So the first answer, well, they're not using copyright law because it's not really good for them. It doesn't give them a cost-effective way to protect their intellectual property. Why is that? Well, part of it is just the realities of costs. So comedians, we understand, sell jokes to one another for about $100 per joke or per laugh. So if they would sell, say, a routine, when there are 8 laughs in between, like in the routine, it would be 8 times, say, 100, 150, 50, depending on the rate. Right, so someone stole a routine from you. That's damage of $200, $500. Are you going to hire a lawyer, go to federal court? Just right, two hours of their work will be worth more than the lawsuit, right? In other practicalities, but also there are doctrinal reasons that I think now, after having taken some copyright law classes, you can appreciate, right? Sometimes there's a problem with fixation. Sometimes there's a problem with idea expression, right? So if you look at this clip, we tried to think hard what would happen if it went to court, and we're not sure. Although all the comedians we spoke with thought that this was wrong, so we call this joke stealing, right? That's under the norm system versus, but we're not sure if this is copyright infringement under the law. Because as you know, under the idea expression dichotomy, if you take a funny idea and you express it differently, right, you're allowed to do that, right? That's how we believe progress in the art and sciences is promoted. In this case, maybe Mencia went too close, right? He didn't even change it from football to perhaps basketball, right? That would have been easy. And you can see the story goes through the same sequence and events. It even has, right, an epilogue, right? Right? Cosby, you don't care. You know who taught him. Mencia had his own version. So it really goes through the same structure. So that's a good copyright case to bring, but I'm not sure it would necessarily win, right? So there are different problems. There's a problem of independent creation. So a lot of jokes are about current events, where it is highly likely that 2 people will come up with the same joke simultaneously, right? Comedians call it parallel thinking. It's the same principle in copyright law, independent creation. So let's see one of such cases. So you'll see the same jokes told by 4 different people. One of them, Carlos Mencia.
Here's this new thing. I don't know if you guys heard this. He wants to build a new wall all down the California-Mexico border, like a 12-foot-high brick wall. It's like 3 feet deep, so no Mexicans get in. But I'm like, dude, Arnold, who do you think is going to build that wall?
I propose that we kick all the illegal aliens out of this country. Then we build a super fence so they can't get back in. And I win. Who's going to build it?
Now you can see how the audience, right, people posting those clips
Now
become...
they want to build a wall to keep the Mexicans out the United States of America. I'm like, who gonna build the motherfucker?
The Republican answer to illegal immigration is they want to build a wall 700 miles long and 20 feet wide. Okay, but who are you going to get to build a wall?
Right, so the first clip we saw, right, so here you see audience participation. That's another aspect of the digital age. Some people, fans, right, are posting what may be shaming clips, but others are trying to be perhaps more objective. Perhaps they see the other side and say, well, Carlos has been accused by Ari Shafir, he's the first person to tell the Mexican wall joke, of stealing that joke from him. But when you see other people telling it at about the same time, it's highly likely that the same joke kind of writes itself in the minds of a lot of funny people who are thinking, what can I say funny about current events? So it's not always clear, right? If you're going to bring a lawsuit, there are good reasons why, right, you may not necessarily win, although you and all comedians we spoke with have a strong gut feeling that something was wrong. So we have an answer for the first puzzle, like why aren't there reported cases why aren't comedians using copyright law that is just waiting for them, right? So the second question is, right, when we go over the utilitarian theories of IP, right, and we suggest that copyright law provides the financial incentive for people, right? It allows creators to recoup the initial costs of creation. I think, well, if the law doesn't do that, if the law does not provide an incentive, right, formal, effective protection, why do we see 15,000 comedians waking up every day and creating new material, right? The law doesn't protect them. And that's the story of this article. Well, it's because they have a system of social norms, right? It's not perfect, right? Formal law isn't perfect. There are laws against stealing, but cars are being stolen and homes being burglarized every day. But if most people follow the law most of the time, and most comedians follow the norms most of the time, the system can function. So what is the system of norms? First, like in copyright law, so the system follows copyright law in many ways, but it doesn't duplicate it. It is different. So the major norm is like the major prohibition under copyright law. You should not copy. That's like the big first no-no, as Jim talked about. But there are others. So for example, first the norm. Let me say a few other things. So just to compare it to how it works in practice. So how does enforcement work? So you know how enforcement works in a court of law. If you think that you've been aggrieved, your material infringed, you bring a lawsuit, right? There's due process, right? You bring your evidence, right? And there's judgment. The process under the norm system is basically, as Jim said, this notion of frontier justice. You're supposed to face, right, the person who you think stole from you and just tell them that, right? I have this joke and your joke comes awfully close to mine, so what do we do about this? And the other person says what they have to say and they suggest their evidence. Look, I did this joke in the Funny Bone Club in Omaha 3 years ago and so saw it. And then you're trying to understand what went on, and it's our understanding, correct me Jim if I'm wrong, that 9 out of 10 times they managed to work it out. So we spoke with comedians that we interviewed for this study, and one of them said, once I was approached by my best friend who told me, look, you're doing my bit. And I told him, that's right, that's where I got it from, and I stopped. Right? So sometimes it may happen, right? In copyright law, you have learned or will learn the notion of subconscious copying. Sometimes you may do this while you're not being aware that you are. And other times, they may come to an understanding. You'll do the joke on the East Coast, I'll on the West Coast, I'll do it this way, you'll tell it that way. But sometimes the other person is not cooperating, and then, as one of the comedians told us, your only copyright protection is a quick uppercut. So that's about enforcement. So what about remedies, right? So, you know, copyright remedies, you'll soon know. Injunctions, temporary, permanent damages, statutory damages, and the like. The norm system doesn't have that, right? What are the social sanctions? We're reputational, as Jim said, right? If the word gets around, it's not only, right, the reputation per se, it translates very fast to income. So a lot of club owners, a lot of managers, they like the art and they don't like people who are stealing jokes from others. There are caveats, right? If they are, right, money talks as well, but still, it is some sanction. You're being cut out of a social network of cooperation because friends can get you work. There's an opening. They can give your name. They won't otherwise. So there's reputation. There's refusals to work, and then there's either violence or threats thereof. So these are the remedies. There are other norms other than the main one against stealing, and these were interesting to us because they differ from the copyright law defaults. So one, for example, I'll mention a few, regards joint authorship. So in copyright law, if two people create a work together, then they are joint authors and co-owners of the copyright, like two academics writing an article, two people creating a movie together. But under the norm system of comedians, if one comic comes up with a premise and the other comedian suggests the punchline, then it is the comedian who came up with the premise who owns 100% of the joke, and the other person basically knows that they are volunteering material, they're helping a friend, but they do not get any stake of ownership. Another norm or practice is that there are no, say, non-exclusive licenses, right, that we see in formal copyright law. There's just outright sales. That's the only transfer of ownership that we see. For example, there's no clear concept of fair use. Comedians do not agree on any particular circumstance in which it would be okay for one comedian to take a joke from another. There has been an historical shift in the art. So comedy as we know it started in the 60s with two norm entrepreneurs, right? Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul. We learned this from Jim. He was among the first that we spoke with, and he educated us immensely. But before that, there was the old system, right? The jokey joke era, where people would stand on stage, kind of read jokes as if out of a joke book, and then you'd have a rim shot, and then, right, the jokes will be interchangeable, pretty much plow and replow old themes like mother-in-law jokes, whatever, knock-knock jokes, right, and all that corn. But in the 60s, those new entrepreneurs started a new style of comedy, and then right, the audiences loved it, and then we got to have stand-up as we know it today, now when humor is much more personal, point of view driven, narrative style, right? So we were trying to think whether there's some more general lessons that we can learn from this system of stand-up comedy that might be a bit more generalizable. So why has comedy changed, right? What happened? So one lesson, I think, that's more general is that more IP does not necessarily usually we think about IP rights as a kind of a sliding scale, right? More IP, right, if you start from zero term, would give, right, more protection would yield more output up to a certain optimal term. And then if you extend it too much, then you're going to see decline to be suboptimal again, right? We want copyright law to be just right, to balance incentive and access. What we see in the case of comedy, that there's another thing going on. So if we moved from the old era, the jokey joke era, where there was no protection, law was never applicable, and there was no system of social norms. So people just took from one another, and that was the norm. Right? The norm system just emerged in the 60s. What we saw is that it's not like when we got more protection, we got more jokes, or even better mother-in-law jokes, right? We just got a different type of humor, right? The nature of the art changed, not just the amount produced, right? We got a different monkey, right? So I think that's interesting, right? When you change the form protection, you may change the art form, not just quantity. And something that's related to it, it also changes who creates, right? So in the old era, right, there were great performers, were great comedians like Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Milton Berle. But they didn't write their own jokes. They all had writers. Many of them had writers. They didn't hide it. That's how comedy worked. Today, they were excellent performers, right? They knew how to time the audience. Many of them, right, did gestures on stage, played with their voice, had fancy costumes. Fast forward to today's comedy, right? They are great writers, very original ones, but they dress simply. Most of them just stand and talk, right? They don't invest in the performative aspects. We can see why. In the past, right, to be a comic, you need to have good material and you have to be a good performer. In the past, they could take away your material from you. There was no effective protection, and people didn't invest much in that margin. They invested more in the technique, which other people couldn't steal. Today, when there's effective protection through the norm system for text, we see people investing more in textual originality, right, and less so in the performative aspects. So we see those two effects of protection. Why did the norms emerge when they did in the 60s? Well, there are a lot of different, there are all the reasons. A lot of things happened in the 60s, and the emergence of comedy is pretty much related to that. But we try to suggest one other additional reason that may have facilitated this shift, and that's an adaptation of Harold Demsett's theory of property rights, suggesting when do we see systems of property rights emerging. And the theory is simple. It's when the cost-benefit for protection changes, when the benefits of protection suddenly grow and the costs drop, we may see property systems rising. And we think that the cost of enforcing rights and jokes is declining thanks to technology, right? It's easier to detect and prove copying. Also, you can see that when jokes are personal, tied to an individual, it's easier to detect stealing, right? When all jokes are interchangeable, so when everybody tells mother-in-law jokes and you hear a new mother-in-law joke, it's really hard to tell, oh, this guy stole it from, right? Everybody, right? Everything is a variation on a theme. But today, when people have distinct personas, there's only a small subset, right, of people a stolen joke could have come from. So at least the new type of comedy is much more amenable to enforcement than the old type of comedy. So we have this system of social norms. Is it better than formal protection? We think that each system comes with its own relative costs and benefits. It's hard to say that one is necessarily better. We seem to like the new form of comedy to the old one, and that's what also markets seem to have chosen. But there are aspects of the norm system that we still find alarming. I mentioned, right, there's no concept of fair use, right? We think that fair use is an important component to have. There's no clear time limitation, so all comics we spoke with thought that it would never be okay to tell somebody else's joke, even after the person is long dead, right? And again, we think the public domain is important, and if there are great jokes, it'll be bad socially that they vanish and no one knows them or retells them. There's violence in the norm system, so one thing we like about law is that people settle their disputes in a civil manner, but when law isn't used, surprise, surprise, right, people also use violence. So we think we're cautiously optimistic, but we think that the norm system has its benefits, it has its costs. Another cost is perhaps some sense of mob justice, right? So, right, there are rumors, there are reputation, but there are also rumors. In some cases, they may be unjustified, right? You have no way to appeal, to correct, right? If someone spread a rumor, it'll be hard to know. And also, and I'll finish on that, some people are great performers. So Robin Williams, right? He's a great performer. If he can't enter comedy clubs, as he once said in an interview, right? Maybe we went overbroad, or sometimes. Maybe people like Mencia, right, who are great performers, but perhaps terrible writers, should have some room, although the current norm system doesn't allow them much of that. Terry, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Dotan. Okay, so we have about 45 minutes for discussion. There are lots of issues on the table. We're going to use a slightly different procedure this go-round. So we have two separate browsers showing questions. On the left is going to be questions submitted from you here. And they are already, great. And on the right are going to be questions submitted by the teaching fellows on behalf of the members of the edX sections. I suggest, Ed, if you can manage it, can you increase the fonts even at the cost of losing some of the questions? Because otherwise it's going to be impossible to see. Yeah, that's much better. Great. Okay. So we're going to start on this side, and then I'm going to exercise my prerogative periodically to butt in with my own questions. Oh, see, these are not attributed. That's interesting. Okay, but when a question is asked that's yours, if you can put up your hand, because it's easier then to address a person than to talk to the screen up here. Let's see. Yeah, so let's try this one, 3 down on the left. Audiences seem to love hackneyed jokes we've heard a million times before. Not even taking into account stealing, aren't audiences just getting what they want? We recycled original jokes, and would stronger protection deny them? So Jim, in your presentation, come on back out here.
Yep.
You're that central guy.
No problem.
In your presentation, you referred a couple of times to the clueless, tolerant of stealing, unhelpful audiences, including this audience, who
Yeah.
you thought was really unhelpful.
Yeah. Who wrote that question? Where? No? Okay. Just so I know who to yell at. All right.
Yeah. So what about that? Is it just...
You know, hackney implies trite but funny. And yes, there are look, you know, a fart is always funny and will always be funny till the end of time. All right? And it doesn't matter who does it. You know, some of the greatest comics in the world, you know, George Carlin, probably his most quoted joke is 2 guys on an elevator, 1 guy farts, everyone knows who did it. It's one of those jokes that has been around from the dawn of time and will be there. The problem is there are innovators and there are people that are just repeating. And if we make it so that the voice of the innovator can't be heard, then we're going to kill the art form. We're going to get to a point where everything's just going to be those jokes. And while I would argue that it's also not 100% correct, because there are some audiences, and let's face it, you know, midnight show on a Saturday, everyone drunk as a skunk, yeah, they want the stuff they think about least. But there's an awful lot of people that are fans of a Chris Rock. There's an awful lot of people that are fans of a Louis C.K. There's an awful lot of people that are fans of comics that make you think as well as just make you laugh. And there needs to be room for all voices and not just the one set of voices. And in order to make room for all the voices, you have to protect the weakest of those voices.
So suppose following up on this, I was struck by your maybe admission somewhere in the middle of your talk that if you couldn't make any money at all, you'd keep on doing it as long as it's possible. And the real reward is the laughs that have been scarce in here thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a variation on the question. Suppose that economic incentives tilted toward hackneyed jokes because, as you say, the original jokes get stolen.
Yeah.
So there's this tilt of the sort Dotan was pointing at. The combination of social norms and the legal system is tilting toward hackneyed jokes. But that's not what you care about, and there are enough members of the audience that care about more authentic jokes. Would you just keep on doing it and defy the economics?
Yes, there seems to be a concept that the job of a comedian is to write stuff that makes every human being laugh. And A, that's impossible, and B, it's also not the job. The job is to do exactly what Louis C.K. is doing, and that is to create a brand that is so specific that there are people that love that brand and will tune in. I mean, there was a great headline in Daily Variety that said, you know, Louis, 8 million people a week can't be wrong. Yeah, 8 million Americans love his TV show and watch it every week, which means 292 million Americans couldn't give a crap about Louis. And I don't think he's suffering because of it. I want to find that one audience that loves me, that likes what I do. And I don't want that audience to be cheated out of hearing it from me. I don't want them hearing it from somebody else and having it watered down.
Great. Okay, so section D3, Jim, is also a question for you. What about, connected to one of Dotan's points near the end of his presentation, is that there is he asserted, there is in the informal norm system no concept of fair use. So I'm sure you know the principle of copyright law that under certain circumstances, transformative uses of copyrighted material, at least if they don't cause economic injuries, will be privileged.
Yep.
And Dotan's suggestion is no such guideline in copyright. So somebody from D3 says, question for Mr. Mendrinos, what about mashing up, remixing a joke? When does a joke, e.g. the aristocrats, belong to everybody?
Yeah, I do think there's a point where it does. And I do think there needs to be some type of a set where when you put something out for public consumption, it becomes public. But now we're also arguing levels of fame. You know, if Louis C.K. does a joke and it goes into a mashup or gets repeated or is turned into an internet meme, that's one thing. But if, Joe Comic, who's barely making a living, can't afford gas to get to his next gig, does the same thing, that's theft. I would think, and you guys are the experts in copyright law, but doesn't it also have to do with how popular it is? You can't parody something that nobody's heard. And with stand-up, my audience is, number in the hundreds on a good night, as opposed to a George Carlin who won up in front of arenas of thousands and won on The Tonight Show 53 times. Yes, if I do something on The Tonight Show, if I do something on Letterman, if Jeff Foxworthy does, You Might Be a Redneck If, it's open to parody. I do believe that, but I don't think with the level of fame that 99% of all comedians are at, that's applicable.
So you're totally right. You have a level of understanding of the guidelines of fair use quite subtle. Yes, you can lose a fair use defense if the thing you are parodying is not publicly recognized. Okay, great. So here's a different variation on the same theme, as long as you stick on this for a moment. I think everything we've discussed in here has involved two comedians, one comedian stealing from another comedian. But there's also this habit of, roughly speaking, called consumers retelling jokes. Around the water cooler in the office or on the playing field. If you heard something really funny last night, you retell it. Not to an audience to make money, just because it's funny and you want to share it. Presumably, you're not going to go after such people either upside the head or legally and so forth. But what I'm interested in is your conception of fairness. Is that wrong?
No, that's fandom. That's what I want. I want you guys to come to my show, and I want you to come up to me afterwards and go, "That joke was awesome when you said this," and then quote it to me. That's when I know you got it. That's when I know you loved it. The difference is you're quoting it to me to tell me how much you enjoyed it, as opposed to me walking into, the Chuckle Hut in Des Moines and seeing somebody doing it to make a living. Again, it's levels. We want the fans. I want you guys to repeat my stuff as much as humanly possible. I've been quoted in tons of newspapers, and those are for-profit places, but I got reviewed in the New York Times. They quoted some of my jokes. Yes, please do. It's going to help grow my fan base. If it's to economically benefit me as an artist, I want it. And if it's not to economically benefit me as an artist, or in the case of someone stealing from me to make a profit, hurting me as an artist, I want limitations.
Great. Okay. At one point in Jim's presentation, he suggested it would be great if the law helped out here. There's you've undoubtedly noticed a difference in the characterization of the extra legal norms between the two of you. That Dotan, you spoke reasonably enthusiastically about the strength of the extra legal system of norms, not as romantically as some of your fellow travelers in this scholarly area, but you still seem to see it as a potent system of norms, whereas Jim was periodically referring to, we're hosed. It's not working. People rip us up all the time. Okay, so this is one of the things we're going to have to address tonight. But here's another. In one manifestation of that division, as Jim says, it would be great if the law helped us out. So the person in the upper right-hand corner here says, Jim used the word IP in reference to his work. Would generic IP copyright protection help or hurt the industry? The self-imposed norms that govern comedians seem to be idiosyncratic to the art form. If law is necessary, how tailored should it be? So what about it? Would it be better if the law intervened? And if so, what shape should it take? Who asked that question? Charlie.
Okay, so I think that Jim wants the law to help. And I think that Jim's perception of the law is more heroic than I think some insiders view it. Because we see a lot of open-endedness, right? In case law, we see the cost of using the social system, monetary and otherwise. You could sue people, but you could be the subject for suit. So there are a lot of costs that we'll have to take into account whether we want to regulate. Specifically regarding copyright law, the law applies currently. You don't have to do anything. It's just the copyright law is, to a large extent, a one-size-fits-all across all industries. And as it happens, it does a bad job of protecting stand-up comedians. So the question is, what do we do? Do we try to tailor copyright law or make special purpose law or copyright law or otherwise that would suit comedians? And then what would it look like? So if we think within the realm of copyright law, we could change a few things. For example, we could say, we can make it cost effective to sue. So we could say independent creation, parallel thinking is not a defense. You can sue over this. The first to come up with a joke is the owner. You could say, well, you could increase the damages, right? So you could say, well, in stand-up, minimal damages are 10 times, 20 times, 50 times of what they are. Suddenly it might be cost effective to start going after people. So we were trying just to hypothesize, well, what would happen if the law came to bear on this practice, and continuing the thinking of when you change the form of protection, you also change the form of the art and who's creating and what's going to be created. It's my suspicion that if people started to sue in the industry, then what's going to happen is that there's going to be economies of scale in protecting against lawsuits and in bringing lawsuits, right? If lawsuits are going to be brought, they're going to be brought against intermediaries, so agents, comedy clubs for secondary liability, right? So those people are going to need to have insurance, and there's going to be economies of scale. So we're likely to see a lot of chains of comedy clubs. Because it will be much more cost effective to clear one act from copyright and then have the person travel in your chain of comedy clubs. So we think that probably big content providers like Disney are going to enter, right? And if that's going to happen, right, we would have the Disney chain of comedy clubs and some other. So probably, right, it's all hypothetical, but a possible future, the material is going to be filtered, cleaned, right? Maybe more family friendly, like Disney generally is. Less cutting edge, right? Less irreverent. And you may or may not like this future, but it's very different, I think, from stand-up comedy as it is today, right? So we can bring legal protection, but we'll change the art form, and then different creators are going to get in, right? And different comedy is going to be produced. And do we want that?
May I? I don't think you guys understand the scope of what thievery does to a comedian. If I get on the Tonight Show, my price in every venue I go in increases. If I get an HBO special, my price in every venue I go in increases. If I work on a set, it might take me 10 years to get that set to perfection, to get that set to where it is absolutely wonderful. And then somebody can come in one night, watch me perform the jokes in that set, do it for the same industry people before I can, and effectively block me from getting, the opportunity to do it in front of a mass audience. It's not like you can quantify and say a joke's worth $150, because it's what joke? Where was that joke intended to go? Is that comic have a genuine opportunity for a shot at fame? It could be, I know it could be as simple as somebody stole your peanut butter joke and who gives a damn? Yeah, I agree with you guys on that. But it also could be somebody stole the 4 jokes that were in the center of your Tonight Show audition. And now you don't get the Tonight Show because those 4 jokes are missing. And they could have cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 5 years. We need a better job protecting and going, okay, jokes have a sliding, escalating scale of value and not a flat monetary value.
So let's talk about technology for a moment. Each of you has discussed how technology seems to cut one way, then cut another way. It strikes me that, picking up on your last comment, Jim, that at least as threatening to your livelihood as piracy is publicity. Publicity in the sense of somebody captures your routine and spreads it around. And even though everybody who sees it knows it's you, so there's no deception and stealing, why would they want to go hear you say it again? They've heard it once, and you sort of blow the wad. Now, one possible response, I suppose, is what Section A2 here says. Section A2 says, if a comedian's success is highly dependent on their personality, does a comedian benefit significantly by taking a single joke? Is a comedian hurt by having just one joke taken if his success ultimately depends on his persona? The way that seems at least potentially connectable here is it doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt Lewis Black to have his routines available on DVD, which they are, because what you're interested in is seeing him perform. And if that's true, so why is stealing a problem?
It's, at a couple of base levels. One, Lewis Black's DVD is available after he's done with that particular concert tour. So the stuff that he's touring with in the country now, you can't get that on DVD. Okay, and I'm very protective, and I've actually gotten websites to take down material that I didn't think was up to my standards yet, or I was working on for another reason, and it's popped up because some club thought they'd use it for advertising, and I've made them take it down. Comedian does have to be very proactive in making sure his brand is protected. But I think I have a huge disagreement with what that person's saying. The Carlos Mencia clip was from an HBO special. Both those clips were HBO specials. He was getting HBO specials based off of somebody else's intellectual property right. Did it hurt Bill Cosby? Probably not. But did it hurt another comedian who was working and doing it the right way, who should have gotten that opportunity? Yeah, it's a cancer in the industry when people are getting opportunities not based on their own intellectual property right. It's, to me, no different than, George Harrison changing He's So Fine to My Sweet Lord. It's somebody else's work. At the end of the day, no matter how beautiful or which version you like better, it was somebody else's work. And that's the important thing to remember.
So the My Sweet Lord example connects directly to the question in the upper left-hand corner here. What do you deal with the phenomenon of unconscious copying, which, can so imagine, it's conceivable. If George Harrison could forget that he heard, I guess it was the Chiffon song back then, perhaps, it's a little implausible, but perhaps Mencia just forgot that he'd heard Bill Cosby talk about, hi, Mom. All right, so hard example. But how do you deal with, who asked this question? Great.
I think Dotan was really on the nose with that. That's when comics go up and talk to each other and going, hey, you kind of realize you're doing my bit, right? You kind of realize that this is happening. There's reputations and there's accidents. And yeah, there are things that are going to slip into your act that are going to be derivative. And when somebody makes you aware of it, you have to have the artistic integrity to go, I won't do it. The problem is, if you're a brand new comic and you're stealing something from a Bill Cosby, chances are that's the best laugh you have in your act. And when somebody points it out to you, now you're faced with, do I keep working or do I get rid of the best laugh in my act and go back to having to do it on my own? And that's where we find out the moral structure of the artist.
Okay, so I got a question related to that last point. Some of the people who are more enthusiastic about extralegal norms even than Dotan emphasize the importance of having homogeneous social systems for them to arise. So for example, one of the contexts in which extralegal norms are thought to have worked great was at least by some standards, is in the 19th century whaling industry. And why did they work well? Because they were all white guys, many of them Quakers, lived in Nantucket, in New Bedford, they had the same ethnic heritage, the same religion, and that meant A, they shared the same conception of fairness, and B, they were vulnerable to social sanctions because they're all members of the same community. And that it works really well in those circumstances. And the more fragmentation there is in the ethnicity, religion, and social affiliations of the members of a community, the less effective social norms are. So if that's true, is it just hopeless to have a system of extra-legal norms in comedy because it's too fragmented along moral standards?
Yes and no. Comedy does tend to be a de facto religion. Any art becomes a de facto religion. If you're if you're a group of people searching for a common goal, whatever goal it is, there's a camaraderie and it becomes a community, whether or not you want it to be. There's always going to be sociopaths in any community. Look around this room. I'm sure you guys have one or two people that you wouldn't exactly want to sit and have a meal with. But for the most part, everyone here could ask somebody else a question and get a good answer. Everyone here could lean on somebody else for advice. Hey, I missed last week's notes. What did I miss? You know, I think comedy does have that community feel. I think the problem is because our community is a lot larger than a classroom, I think there's an awful lot of people that are stepping outside the norms. And unfortunately, if you've got that, Carlos Mencia is, I don't know if you've ever seen him live, he's a brilliant performer. You know, and I'm someone that despises the fact that he steals material. He's absolutely riveting to watch on stage. He does everything in a performance absolutely correctly, you know, which is why it's even more loathsome to me. And you're going to get people like that on occasion, and when you have that combination of talent and no moral code, it's disheartening to those of us with a moral code.
I don't understand this question, but I got 19 votes, so I should ask it. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
I think one horse-sized duck. I think. Thank God that word has a U in it. All right. It took you guys long enough.
All right. So, dead time. A completely different question here. So if Jim is right that it's a few sociopaths, this is arguably a context for boycotts. So as you well know, there was this effort in fashion in the early 20th century to capitalize on a structure like that and the presence of intermediaries to organize a boycott. So the premise seemed to be that there were relatively few copyists in fashion and a lot of innovators, and the innovators got together and they formed a kind of alliance, like you described, in which they said to the retailers, analogous to the comedy clubs, we won't give you any clothes if you carry the clothes of the copyists. And it worked. The retailers were vulnerable to the boycott, and so they agreed, and they refused to carry the work of the copyists, and it worked. So what happened? Well, the Justice Department said, actually, you can't do that. It's a violation of antitrust law. Should we encourage such a system in comedy? This would be an intermediate point between law, that's how it should be managed, extra-legal norms, no law. This would be, should antitrust law be modified so as to facilitate extra-legal boycott-based sanctions?
So, in the early norms literature, there was this assumption, implicit, sometimes explicit, that norms are great, norms are efficient, they do better than law, right? So the early literature, late 80s, outside IP, right, had this tone to it. But very quickly, people, at least some, stepped back from it and suggested and saw that sometimes social norms might be bad, right? So the fact that the major, say, fashion designers want to boycott somebody that doesn't play by their rules might be individually rational. They want to maximize their profits. They would do that. But that's where there's a potential wedge between the private and the social right thing to do, right? So I don't blame them. They were trying to maximize profits. But the question, whether what Jim wants, which I relate to, is good or is in the best social interest or not. It might or it might not. We should ask the question, right? So There are a lot of cases historically where groups of people, say, boycotted other groups, right? And in some cases, it was things we didn't like, whatever. It could be discrimination on certain basis, and that's where we wanted the law to intervene, right? In other cases, it might be good or bad. So the fact that there's a majority boycott doesn't mean that it's good or bad normatively. In the whales case that you mentioned, it's true. Those whale hunters, they were a close-knit group, and they all agreed on the same norms, and they hunted the whales to extinction, right? So it maximized their own joint welfare, but was it socially optimal, right? Right? They didn't think about putting quotas, right? They were externalizing something, right? So even in the case of unanimous consent, that's not always right, certainly not when there are some dissenters. So we can't infer from that most people want something, that it's good socially, right? In some cases, yes.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Okay, but applied to this particular context, are there unacceptable negative externalities associated with empowering more effectively comedians to shut down piracy through boycotts or any other means?
Yes. Right? We have a legal system that has a due process that inflicts pain, sanctions, upon some process of proving that we're all comfortable with. If there's a rumor, how can we be sure that it's right or that it's wrong? Right? It may be driven by jealousy. Who has proven it? Someone may be outcast from a form of art, right? So do we want to necessarily back this or not? So there could be. Here's another thing.
So wait a minute. So Jim, is this right? Descriptively, are there people who are wrongly run out of town in comedy?
There are people that are wrongly accused. There's always going to be people that are wrongly accused, and I don't think a glitch in the law is a reason not to have a law. I mean, what is, again, I totally understand what you're saying, but if somebody with the fame and economic structure of a Robin Williams steals a joke from somebody who's struggling to make that month's rent, what recourse does that new comic have? You stole his intellectual property. You're more famous. You have more avenues to protect yourself. If we don't have our own social structure to take care of it, what recourse does that kid have? What protection does he have? And if that's the case, then is art just for the person who's got the most connections, the most fame? And that sounds like a way to kill creativity right there.
So one of the themes in your last comment and in some other comments, it relates to this question from D1 here. It's aimed at me, but I'm going to make it related to you. Does social norm enforcement break down in the case of asymmetrical power relationships between groups and individuals? If group A, person A, can't be effectively socially damaged by group person B, how is enforcement supposed to occur? So generalizing this question, if I get it right, is if the two parties are in a hierarchical relationship or even just unequal in status and wealth, is it just always hopeless to expect this person to be policed by social sanctions?
No. Famously, there have been comedians that have cut checks to comedians that were less famous as an apology for coming up with, similar material when confronted. Why? Because they understand if I don't get some retribution, I am going to hit you. And when the police come, what's going to hit the newspapers is you're a thief. And I'm sorry, but public shaming is part of the equation for the younger, less powerful ones to get retribution from the older and more popular ones. And it's unfortunate that it's come to that, and it's sad that it's come to that, but it is effective. And right now, for a large section of comedians, that's the only bullet they have in their gun. Nothing else is even remotely effective.
Okay.
Is there another duck question? Is there one?
No, it's not. No, there isn't another duck question up here. They may be color-coded. I'm not sure exactly what the color scheme is. Red means more popular? Yeah? Okay. Now the third question on this line here is actually related to the one theme you introduced I want to come back to. This is this idea of due process. Now, due process seems to connote various things. The one you emphasized is protections that one enjoys before a sanction is deemed to be appropriate. Right to confront your accuser, get witnesses, have an independent fact finder figure it out, discount the value of rumors, and so forth. So we have some faith in the processes of law in sifting evidence. Okay, there's that. But then this question is more related to the sanction, the character of the sanction. That there's something civilized about $600,000 in damages, and there's something uncivilized about a punch to the head. But maybe that's just completely wrong. Maybe this form of quick and dirty and relatively temporary social sanction is not only effective, but civilized.
Mm-hmm. I don't justify so I don't think that statutory damages of $150,000 are that's the number we should have. But right, we don't necessarily think that's right? So at least the law doesn't back people, right? So if you say, well, let's say a joke is worth $100, $5,000 present value for telling the joke, or if it's $10,000, if someone stole your car that's worth $20,000 and you punch them in the face, it's not like the police is going to say, oh, yeah, it's above the threshold. You can punch them, right? We haven't made this judgment, right? So we have certain social value, and we don't think that theft, right, justifies personal retribution. Now, it could happen under the social norms. That flies under the radar. The law is a costly apparatus to operate, right? Not everything, right, is legal. Some things fly under the radar. Some things you can bring witnesses for. Some things you can't argue. Some things that are too costly. There are a lot of infractions that are just below the legal radar. So I'm not saying that $150,000 is the right sanction and a punch in the face isn't normatively. The question, as I understood earlier, was should we change antitrust law or should we change the law in order to say, well, this is legit. So the law, as the law came to incorporate the Whaler's norm, we could say, well, the law should incorporate. So you can punch someone else if you think that they stole your joke, and that's fine. You're not going to go to jail. It's okay. I think we haven't made this judgment. In other cases, I can see why the economic harm to comedians is so different from our social judgments about other economic harms.
You're also stealing their art. You're also stealing, you steal a piece of my joke, you're stealing my creativity, you're stealing something I've worked on, in some cases, for years. Art is a very passionate, thing, and there's a fallacy that comedy isn't an art because it looks simple. Looks like everyone can do it. You're not up there with an instrument and somebody goes, I don't know how to play that. That must be hard. It takes a lot of time to develop as a comedian. I've literally been on stage over 10,000 times, and I still learn every time I get up there. I write an hour a day every day minimum, and I still learn every time I get on stage and every time I put pen to paper. The theft isn't just a joke. The theft is a process. The theft is an inextricable piece of your own humanity. Do I think a punch to the side of the head is fair and equitable? No, but I'm not legally allowed to stab them in the throat. I mean, it's unfortunately, there is no price tag you can put on what is your passion, your art, and the thing that you feel that you're destined to do in life. Mm-hmm. And, would I love a monetary system? Yeah, I would. What I'd love better is a system that would make the people stop, make the thievery stop. Nobody wants, if you ask me, would I rather get $150,000 or would I rather someone not steal my joke? My answer is always going to be, don't steal my joke, period. And believe me, I could use $150,000. But again, it is your art, and it has a value beyond monetary.
So maybe we can be just constructive for half a minute. So why aren't comedians just unionizing, right? And just coming with what you said. We don't have a union. We don't have a legal guild that says what's right and what's wrong, like script writers have, and they have rights versus the clubs, right? So why don't
we tried 3 times to form unions. One in 1981 in Los Angeles out of the Comedy Store after there was a comedian who was being treated poorly by a club, and he committed suicide in front of the club. And the rest of the comedians tried to unionize, and they got shut down. And the Professional Comedians Association from 1984 till 1990, and they got shut out by the clubs, basically union busting and only using non-union comedians. And then again, the New York Comedians Association of 2004, which met with a lot of resistance as well. You have to remember, I work in casinos and cruise ships and corporate gigs, and there's an awful lot of comedians who are working tonight for $35 at a bar in Worcester, Mass, because that's the only gig they can get. And there tends to be a failure of unionization because of the desperation of a lot of the comedians. It's our own fault we're not unionized because we can't see the forest for the trees. But there still should be some protections under the law. There's a lot of non-unionized workers that have protections.
Here's a question with an academic start, I guess. One of the 4 theories of copyright that we have studied or are studying in this course is known as the personality or personhood argument, in which the basic idea is the legal system should protect fragile and important bonds between creators and created. Tends to be stronger as an idea in Europe than it is in the United States, but it's growing in power here too. It usually arises in the context of visual arts, so the painting is the standard example. So many of the things that you've said, including just a few minutes ago, evoke this. It's stealing my art, it's stealing myself. So if this is, it's interesting. So here 2 loosely related questions come out of it. One of them that used to be up here, maybe is not any longer. Is there a half-life on that? So the question that used to be up on the board here was, well, what about taking now and 1980s Cosby joke? I mean, has it ceased to be attached to his personality now? Dotan suggests there is no limit to the duration. That would, well, just answer that one.
Isn't the life of copyright, as I understand it, the lifetime of the creator plus 75 years?
It's life plus 70, yes, that's
life
right.
Plus 70?
You think that's right?
As far as I know, Bill Cosby's still alive. I don't think, stealing somebody's copyright while it's still in effect is good at any point. Yeah, if you're asking me, Fat Jackie Leonard died in 1971, would it be okay to do something of his? Probably, yeah, probably. I wouldn't because of my ginormous ego, but it probably would be okay to do. But we don't have any norms. We don't have any set or any structure. People think it's okay to grab a Cosby bit because, oh, you did it 8 concerts ago. Then what's to stop me from grabbing, all of Bill Hicks's material and going on tour with that? It was brilliant material. He's been dead for 20 years. Why not? It's still socially relevant. Why not? Well, why not is because it's not mine. I didn't do it.
Okay, here's one last question to connect the 2 of you. Dotan, one of the themes in your presentation, if I get it right, was that the law has power, and sometimes that power is exerted in unexpected directions. And in particular, the emergence, correct me if I get you wrong here, but the emergence of this semi-effective system of norms in the 1960s helped change the kind of comedy. It helped power the shift from emphasis on performance with kind of stock material to personality-based and more, roughly speaking, authentic styles of comedy, of which I guess Jim's style would be an example. Okay, so this attributes a fair amount of power to law as helping to make a cultural change. Is this right? Or is it, what explains the transition in styles of comedy in the 1960s? Is it because a new system of norms was available, or is it because of something else?
I think it was a great confluence of events. One, a new system of norms, I think absolutely. 2, television, and we got to see what brilliant television like your Show of Shows was doing, which obviously influenced people like Mort Sahl and like Lenny Bruce. 3, political climate. People were more free to speak. We're talking 60, 61, 62. the Kennedy years when, there was a change in the climate of the country. I think all those things led to it, but I think just like every art, there's movements. There are things that are popular and things that are not popular. There's an awful lot of insult comedy, which is really in vogue right now and getting more popular by the day. It's what's popular right now. I think, just as there's trends in fine art and just as there's trends in music, I think there's trends in comedy as well.
So, Dotan, any closing words you want to add?
No, I think I
Okay.
pretty much touched upon.
All right. Jim?
Yeah, guys, figure out a way that my stuff doesn't get stolen, all right? I'm counting on you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.